Surprise, surprise, the Duke Blue Devils have an absolutely loaded roster and are led by a presumptive lock for the number one overall pick in the draft. Christian and Nick here with Conor O'Neill, who covers Duke for Devils Illustrated on Duke Rivals Network. Conor, thanks for joining us. So tell us about, obviously there's a ton of hype with this team. It's a super talented roster. What have you been hearing about how things have been going this summer, and, how excited is everyone? I assume everyone is really fired up.
It's funny because obviously Cooper Flagg is the headliner, but there was a point in the summer, if I remember the timing correctly, it was right before Cooper went out to Vegas and was practicing with the USA basketball team. It was almost like you were hearing about 2 or 3 other freshmen more than you were hearing about Cooper Flagg, because it was kind of like we already know what Cooper Flagg is. He's been on the pedestal for more than a year now, ever since he reclassed. And the reclass, like, everybody saw coming for 2 or 3 months before it was announced. So you were hearing about, like, oh my God, Khaman Maluach is come in, and he's kind of this unknown because he didn't have the same exposure as like an Isaiah Evans or a Darren Harris. So all of a sudden Khaman Maluach is the revelation of the freshman class. And oh my God, he could be like a top 10 pick. You knew about Khaman Maluach because he was going to go play for the South Sudan team in the Olympics. And then Cooper goes to the USA tryouts or practices or whatever those were in Vegas. And he's shooting threes over AD and dunking on Bam. And it's just like, yeah, this is going to be unreal. I wasn't around Duke for the Zion year, but I was kind of on the periphery of that. Like, I was there in Charlotte when he came back in the ACC tournament. And even then, like, that hype train didn't take off until the opener against Kentucky, when they ran them off the floor by 30 or something like that. It was like 118-84, some crazy ass score. It feels like we're already at that point with Cooper Flagg. It feels like the hype train is already out of the station. It feels like it's freshman All-America, freshman maybe the player of the year nationally type season is coming. So it's fully pulled away from the station there on the Cooper hype train.
Yeah, what can we, Chris had just mentioned this before we got on here, and I was like, that's true. Like, I've only seen highlights of Flagg. I've never watched him play a full game. So is the hype justified, and what can we expect from him year one with Duke?
So back in like June, I thought I had this really well nuanced hot take that Cooper Flagg was not going to average 15 points a game. And that was more because if you watch him for a whole game, you really pick up on him doing all of the little things well. Like, he has this innate basketball sense, this IQ that puts him in the right place to get deflections. And I mean, he's just more of a stat sheet stuffer than he is a guy who's going to go out and score 30 every single night. So I kind of saw a typical Cooper Flagg night in, a random mid-January game against an ACC team being something like 13 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists, a couple blocks, a couple steals. Like, you're not leading SportsCenter with that, but he's really helping your team win in every single aspect. I think his jumper is a little better than I thought it was. I think he's improved that over the summer. I think he is going to probably score in the 17 to 20 point range. He's just like, you'll hear the story, probably depending on how much you watch Duke basketball games this year. You'll hear the story ad nauseum of him riding around with his mom and his twin Ace on the way to basketball practices for like an hour and a half or 2 hours one way. And they'd plug in the highlight clips and the film of, I think it was the 86 Celtics. It was one of those 80s teams of the Celtics. And all Cooper did was watch Larry Bird. And everything that Larry Bird did on the basketball court, he's tried to emulate and kind of shaped his game. And that's kind of the foundation of where he gets all this, again, innate ability to be in the right place at the right time.
What entices me a lot about him, you mentioned this about just everything he does well. Like, defensively, he just seems like he can be just so good. And when you think about like Zion and Paulo as the two most recent, well, Paulo wasn't the lock to be the number one pick, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Those were guys that I feel like always when I watched Duke, I was like, they're not being used enough. Like I feel like they should have the ball more. Like sometimes I was just frustrated that other guys were shooting too much and not getting to that. But that's why I think Cooper in this roster fits so well, is because he, like you said, can totally average 17 plus points a game, but like he doesn't need to clearly be the best player, in games, which I think just bodes well for Duke. And we'll get to this a little later about how I think the veteran additions were just very well thought out and very smart. But the two guys staying, Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster, you need, no matter how good and talented your front court is, you need strong guard play. So do you expect this? I think Tyrese Proctor, when Nick and I mentioned this, like the fact that he's not being touted as this random All-American for no reason, like because he had a few good games, like will that benefit him to kind of have the eyes and the pressure off him a bit? And then Foster missed some time last year, but what are your expectations for that backcourt, and what do they need to do? What's the focus on getting them to excel this year?
It's kind of weird to evaluate Tyrese because it's very much like beauty in the eye of the beholder. So last year there was part of you that looked at Tyrese coming off of his freshman year when his freshman year basically played out in thirds, and he was overwhelmed in the first third. The second third was about the growth because Jeremy Roach missed some games, and that's when they moved Tyrese on the ball and Roach off the ball. And then the last third of that freshman year for Tyrese Proctor, he was arguably Duke's best or second best player when they go and win the ACC championship. So if you went into last year expecting him to just extrapolate and continue the linear growth of, he's a rocket ship, you're thinking like lottery pick. You're thinking he's going to be this awesome ACC guard, big bodied, but can shoot. And that really didn't happen this year, right? He's still at Duke, so he's obviously wasn't a lottery pick. If you kind of went into last year thinking that wouldn't be the case, if you thought there was going to be some stumbling blocks, if you thought he was going to he was going to struggle to find his place with a really strong 4-guard backcourt that they couldn't play all 4 of them at the same time, then last year kind of happened the way you thought it would. And so I think going into this year, my main contention last year was I expected him to get stronger in his upper body between his freshman and sophomore year, because he didn't do his freshman summer at Duke. He was still coming over from Australia. I expect the summer between sophomore and junior year, I didn't see that much of a difference in his strength upper body wise last year that I thought we would see. I think if that gets addressed, and if he's still the same shooter, there's some thought that like it's a stain on his resume right now that I think he was 0 for 10 or 0 for 12. He was something abysmal against State in the Elite Eight game, and that's going to be the one thing that everybody that follows Duke knows him for going into this year. I have some confidence in Tyrese though. I think that he'll thrive. I want to try to say this the right way. I think he'll thrive with fewer guards around him. There's going to be, there's not going to be a Jared McCain next to him taking minutes. There's not going to be Jeremy Roach next. Like, not that he didn't get along with those guys, but you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like,
well, Roach wanted to be a point. He went to Baylor to be the point guard, I feel like.
Yeah, and I know this isn't the Baylor show, but I kind of think that Jeremy's kind of miscalculating his own talents there. I think he's better as an off-ball guard based on what I saw for 3 years at Duke. But yeah, and then Caleb Foster, he didn't have the stats, but there were some games last year where he was arguably Duke's most important player. Like, they probably lose to Michigan State early in the season, and that was not a good Michigan State team at that point, at least. They lose that game if not for Caleb Foster scoring like 16 points and shooting really well. And he was really the the part that really kind of eats at you if you're a Duke fan and if you're on the staff is he was really starting to come into his own when he suffered the injury. And then he suffers the injury at Wake Forest, and it's the game that had the court storming afterward. All we were talking about was Kyle Filipowski, court storming. We had to go through that whole discussion point again. It really took away from the fact that, hey, early in the second half, Duke lost a really important player. There's an injury status that needs to be updated here, and nobody cared about it because we had to discuss whether court storming should happen in college basketball for the 87th time in the last 5 years. So, and the other part of it that really eats it at you if you're Duke is, I was there in Dallas and I was watching Caleb Foster go through stretching and warm-ups, and he looked like a guy that might only be a week or two away from being able to get on a basketball court and run a little bit. So it's just the timing of injuries, where if the injury had happened a week or two earlier, they might have had him against NC State. They might have had a alternate for Tyrese Proctor having an off night that night. And, we might be talking about this team coming off of a Final Four run instead of getting upended by a team in NC State.
Is it fair to say Khaman will be in year one similar to because he's so raw, but he's so athletic and he's so good. I watched him on South Sudan. The guy's impressive. Is he going to be similar to Derek Lively, Mark Williams in year one?
I think the blueprint for him to have a good year and for Duke to be successful is basically just go be Derek Lively. Go put pressure on the rim as a lob threat, defend our own rim in the middle. I don't think anybody's going into the season expecting him to be putting up 20-point games, but to just be a rim protector and to be a lob threat. Duke really did not have a lob threat out of the pick and roll last year, other than when Sean Stewart was in there and ran the correct play. So that's really all it is. And it sounds so simple. And given what we know about Derek Lively and how good he is now that he went through a rookie season and almost got the Mavs to an NBA championship, it's a little more of an ask, but that's basically it. They just need him to be a Derek Lively type player, put up blocks, put up rebounds, keep people from scoring at the rim. It does boil down to being that simple.
To get a 7'2" 5-star who's played in the Olympics alongside this insane defensive prospect Cooper Flagg, it is going to be and I know they're young, and I know there might be maybe some growing pains, I guess, to adjusting the college game, but right now it's hard not to look at those two and think how in the world are you going to score in the paint against this team? And another reason why I think Duke being ranked so high is justified, and honestly, maybe not even high enough. I feel like they're kind of consensus number 4 right now, and it feels a little low when you think about how good this team can be. But Malik Brown, Mason Gillis, Sion James, such great additions. When you look at the Ryan Youngs, the Theo Johns, and who was Grandisons of the world, the vet guys that have been brought in and just completely flopped, in my opinion. Guys who just really did not elevate. It kind of sounded like they were just kind of there, and it was just this weird dichotomy of the young talent and then these guys who just kind of get thrown out there. But you get Mason Gillis is a winner. He doesn't need the ball. He defends, he rebounds, and he shoots 40% from deep. Malik Brown is a Swiss Army knife. He's underrated at Syracuse because people didn't really care about Syracuse, but he's a winning basketball player. He made a lot of winning plays. And then Sion James, I don't know as much about, but he seems like an athletic 6'6" wing who can shoot the 3 ball. That adds a great dynamic. So can you talk about the impact those guys? I know you hate talk about it. I'm sorry. The impact those guys have had, and has anyone specifically stepped up as a vocal leader for this group?
I think leadership will come pretty naturally for Mason Gillis. He seemed like he was the enforcer for Purdue for the last couple of years, and you're always going to take a guy that has Final Four experience. I think was he the Big Ten Sixth Man of the Year last year? I think it's in his resume there. I'll start with Sion James too. If you got tired of hearing Jay Billis call Trevor Keels an NFL linebacker a couple years ago, you're going to get tired of it this year because he's basically a 6'4", 6'5", 225-pound, like sculpted wing or bigger guard. I don't know what kind of role they'll have for him. I can't imagine he'll be the primary ball handler when he's out there. Like you'll never want him out there without Caleb Foster or Tyrese Proctor on the floor. But there's John's proven over the last couple of years he's going to have some lineup versatility. Like he's going to move some guys into some different spots. I think you could see Cooper Flagg play the 3, the 4, or the 5 if he wants to get a little smaller and put Cooper in the middle. I think you can see that. Sion, it was kind of gradual improvement at Tulane. Like he didn't blow anybody away his first 3 years really, and then it all sort of came together last year to where it was like, oh my God, how, if you just watch last year's film, you're like, how is this guy only at Tulane? He should be at a power conference school. It took him time to get there, but now because of the COVID year, basically Duke can get a bonus year with that guy and he can go play at Duke instead of trying to go find his way in Slovenia or Lithuania or wherever. I'm right there with you, Christian, with Malik Brown. One of the funny little tidbits, I think he had his career high at Cameron last year. I think he scored like 27 or 29. So it'll be a little fun nugget to cover with him when we get to talk to him. Like basically the only reason you came to Duke was because you had a career night here, right? Like that's the whole draw. But yeah, I'll try to toe the line here. Duke lacks some things in the last 2 years. They lack some toughness. They lack some physicality. It showed up in the second round loss to Tennessee at the end of the first year for John. And then last year it showed up in spurts, and it showed up in the 2 losses to NC State that ended their season. It showed up, I'm trying to think of some of the other games they lost. Last year was the year they went to Arkansas and lost. I think it was there. Last year they went to Georgia Tech and lost. Duke's staff had a very specific, not to go all Liam Neeson here, but they had a very specific set of skills that they wanted to target in the portal. They wanted to get more experience. They wanted to get tougher, and they wanted to get more mature. And the only way you can get more mature is through the portal. You can't bring in freshmen that are 22 years old, unless you bring in Australian punters. But I don't think they're helping Duke win basketball games. So yeah, it was a very targeted transfer class that they had to bring in, and that's kind of, without throwing anybody under the bus, that's also one of the reasons why they had so many transfers at the end of the season.
Yeah, it'll easily be the toughest Duke team under John Shire, and it's not even close. They won't get bullied at any points in the season.
So you're still going to have some growing pains. Like I know Christian mentioned it. You're still going to have some growing pains, but that's why it was important for John to schedule the way he did, and that's why there's a road trip to Arizona. Everybody loves to crush Duke, and rightfully so, for not playing the true road games under Coach K. I always kind of chuckled at that because I thought it hurt Duke more than anybody should really care about. Like if you're not a Duke fan, you should like the fact that they don't do that, because it means if you're one of their first couple road games, you've got a better chance of beating them than if they'd gone out and gotten tested early. So that trip to Arizona is a big one early in the season. They play Kentucky and Atlanta. They play, I think it's Kansas and Vegas. I think it's Illinois in New York in late February is great. I love the fact that the ACC is going to get at least one shot to not rewrite, but at least like have a little bit of a data point after we get into 2 months of playing only conference games and everybody thinks that the ACC is terrible and everybody else plays better basketball. So I think it's not like things have gone wrong for John in his first 2 years. They won an ACC championship, went to the Elite Eight. I think how many programs would love to have that in a 2-year stretch? But there's a little more sense of things coming together in this season.
No, and I totally see that, and I'm really bullish on this top, I guess, 7, 8 guys. But can you tell me more about Con Newpel, and if that hype that I was seeing in the summer is justified? Is he a guy that is on the one and done radar? And then these other 4 stars, and then Sheffield, the Rice transfer. Who do you expect out of that group to play a key role?
Sheffield's just going to kind of be a bench rotational practice type of player. I think the hype for Con Newpel is real. You're always a little hesitant when you hear about these things in the summer. But I can tell you, I was kind of hearing the same things about Caleb Foster and Jared McCain last year, and those certainly turned out to be true. I heard the same types of things about Tyrese Proctor going into his freshman year, and he was a little overwhelmed at the start of it, but it played out well over the course of that season. I think he's a perfect fit for if you're going to build your team around Cooper Flagg and 2 experienced guards who can penetrate. You're going to want somebody on the wing who can space the floor, and that's what Con can bring to the table. I don't know what they're going to get out of the PVI guys, the Darren Harris and Patrick Ngongba. Ngongba missed most of last season with I believe it was a knee injury. It was either knee or foot. He was back by the end of it. Darren Harris missed most of the summer with a wrist injury that I believe he needed surgery for. So expectations for those two aren't as high. Isaiah Evans was the one to keep a close eye on because he was here in North Carolina. He's at North Mech in Charlotte. He had some massive scoring nights down there. He is a to use the ball knower term, he is a bucket getter. John has shown us one thing over the last 2 years. It's that if you don't play defense, you're not going to play. So I think that's going to be his biggest hurdle. If Isaiah can play defense, he's going to be in the rotation and earn some minutes. But if that's a liability, he's going to fall into the same category as TJ Power last year, Jaden Schutt the year before. Like, it doesn't necessarily matter so much to John if you can help him offensively if you're giving up that many points on the other end. That's just not the way he wants to run his rotation. So I think there's depth there. I think it'll need to be cultivated a little bit. He'll need to see what he's got in the non-conference games that don't include playing other blue bloods and top 20 teams. But they've got some wiggle room there with some non-conference games to figure that out.
It's going to be exciting watching it all come together. And it's pretty interesting when you see the talent that left, whether it's to the NBA or to the portal. To not many schools, I feel like, can have that much talent leave and be in a better position. So it's a testament to Shire and the Duke brand. And, in a little mini transition, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but like it was a little mini era of end of Coach K, beginning of John Shire. And I feel like now we're in the John Shire era. He's got the number one prospect. Like Duke basketball is in feels like it's, I don't know. It was like a little weird time period. And now it's like not weird. It's just Duke is duking again. So, thanks again so much for joining us, Connor. Great stuff, great insight, and we'll be in touch as the season goes along.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.